Hi, my name is Angela Zhang. I am Associate Professor and Director of the Center for Chinese Law at the University of Hong Kong. I'm the author of a forthcoming book, Chinese Antitrust Exceptionalism, How the Rise of China Challenges Global Regulation, which will be published by the Oxford University Press in March 2021. I was born and raised in China, educated in both China and the United States, practiced law in 3 different jurisdictions before joining academia. This book comprises over a decade of my research and reflection on this topic. Chinese Antitrust Exceptionalism details how China's unprecedented rise challenges global antitrust regulatory order. Although my book focuses on antitrust, it is essentially a book about globalization. In fact, the conflicts that we observe between China and the global antitrust order offer us a lens through which we can closely observe the systematic issues that are dividing China and the Western liberal democracies. As tensions between China and the West have escalated in recent years, it has become essential for us to understand the sources of these tensions. My book delves into the distinct Chinese political and economic institutions which are causing these conflicts that have erupted today. And despite all the legal challenges I detail in my book, I actually remain hopeful for a peaceful relationship between China and the West, a future that is grounded in mutual respect and bound by a shared global economy. Chinese antitrust law enforcement is unlike any other country in the world. Many multinational companies found themselves in unfamiliar territory. Although they may cry foul to those outside China, citing due process violations or insufficient transparency, they rarely challenge the antitrust agencies directly. China is not only unique as an antitrust regulator, but also as a target for regulation. As China ramps up its antitrust enforcement within its borders, the rest of the world is doing the same against Chinese firms. At the moment, both the US and the EU are struggling with how they fundamentally see Chinese firms. Should they be viewed as individual companies, or do they all fall under the umbrella of the China Inc.? There is no clear black or white answer to this question, and the usual regulatory emphasis on ownership and control can often lead to misleading results. This difficulty to define the scope of China Inc. has forced Chinese companies to navigate a sea of uncertainty as they attempt to do business with the West. Antitrust agencies in China are bound by the extensive rules dictated by the bureaucracy. Some of these rules are formal laws that are documented. Others are unspoken. So even if these agencies are seldom challenged in court, they cannot escape the constraints of bureaucratic politics. And in order to understand the actions taken by Chinese antitrust agencies, we need to ask a few key questions. What is the mission of the agency? What is its bureaucratic culture? And what about its organizational structure? All these factors shapes its enforcement agenda, investigative approach, and a final regulatory outcome. Let's take an example. The National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC, one of the 3 former antitrust agencies in China, is in charge of macroeconomic management. Over the years, the NDRC's price regulation and supervision department has seen a significant decline in power. It then saw antitrust as an opportunity to fulfill its original mission and to expand its policy control. It is thus no surprise that the agency has prioritized its enforcement efforts on daily consumer goods, and in some cases, it even pressured merchants to lower prices. Why is it that companies so rarely challenge Chinese antitrust agencies? One common explanation is that companies don't bother to do so because they don't stand a chance of winning. This is true in some cases, but for the most part, it's not that companies are afraid that they won't win. It's more that they know how much they stand to lose for even trying. This is especially true for companies operating in the legal gray areas. Let's take the example of Biostime, one of the 9 infant formula manufacturers that I investigated for conducting resale price maintenance in 2013. The NDRC strategically exposed the company to negative media publicity because Biostime tried to vigorously defend itself at the beginning. As a result, the company lost over 1/3 of its market capitalization within 1 week. Cases like this send a chilling effect to companies thinking about challenging the agency. That explains why publicly listed companies would rather cede to the agency's demand than risk seeing a dramatic fall in their stock prices. The period after the Great Recession of 2008 saw a large influx of capital into Europe from mostly Chinese state-owned firms. The European Commission has needed to decide whether these companies represent individual entities or form part of China Inc. In attempting to resolve this question, the Commission has moved towards treating all Chinese firms in one sector as a single entity. But if these companies do belong to the China Inc., then the Commission has potentially blocked itself from challenging mergers or cartels between Chinese firms. This regulatory dilemma explains why the Commission has been actively seeking alternative regulatory tools to deal with Chinese investment. Its most ambitious proposal came in June 2020 when it released a white paper that would set up a new merger control regime to vet state-backed acquisitions. And many observers believe that this move is precisely targeted at Chinese firms. China's dominance of the global supply chain has been a source of concern for American policymakers, especially in light of COVID-19. With 97% of the antibiotics and over 90% of the vitamin C consumed in the United States coming from China, it is no surprise that American policymakers are increasingly worried about their over-reliance on China for drugs and other essential supplies. In fact, several Chinese exporters have been suing the United States for conducting export cartels, with one such case involving several vitamin C manufacturers reaching all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2018. The Chinese exporters felt that they have been placed in a catch-22. Either they compete fiercely with each other, driving prices so low that they risk violating anti-dumping rules, or they agree among themselves to raise prices and risk violating the antitrust rules. Because of the current rising geopolitical tensions between China and the United States, there is a heightened risk that Chinese exporters may be subject to more trade and antitrust scrutiny in the years to come. The U.S. government has wide discretion in imposing sanctions on foreign businesses and individuals, as we have seen in cases involving Huawei and ZTE. And the Trump administration has not been shy in using this power to influence trade and foreign policy against China. In response, China unleashed a host of retaliatory measures, including the use of antitrust law, which allows intervention in overseas business practices, thereby extending China's long-arm jurisdiction. One recent example is Qualcomm's attempted $44 billion purchase of NXP Semiconductors in 2018. The deal obtained clearance from 8 jurisdictions, and China was the only one that held up this deal. China did not block the deal, but strategically used its merger approval as a bargaining chip during negotiations with the United States. As Sino-US tensions intensify, Chinese antitrust may become the battleground for trade and national security issues. With trust between China and the West being so low, it is natural to give up hope for any chance of cooperation. But cooperation does not necessarily require a high level of trust or friendship. It can even occur in a hostile situation, as long as the two sides continue to have significant leverage over each other. For instance, if Chinese authorities hold foreign multinational companies hostage through its aggressive law enforcement, Foreign governments can do the same by holding Chinese companies hostage. And we already see both the US and the EU are heading towards that direction. Conversely, if Chinese companies are blocked from Western markets, similar to what we have seen with Huawei and TikTok, then foreign governments will have less leverage over China. And that doesn't bode well for future cooperation. People like to imagine that Chinese policymaking is a straightforward process. They imagine that the leadership at the top make up their minds and the policy is born. They imagine that all Chinese businesses, whether public or private, are merely extensions of state power. However, as I show you in the book, the Chinese government is not a monolith. Instead, power is fragmented within Chinese bureaucracy. And despite pervasive state interventions, the Chinese economy is highly decentralized, and companies do fiercely compete with each other. So what you see on the surface is merely the tip of the iceberg. The reality is that the Chinese economic and political landscapes are as complex as the institutions that shape them.